Eric Clapton had said the words in print. Hendrix uses effects as a crutch. Tonight in London, Jimi was about to prove him wrong without touching a single pedal. What nobody in that audience knew was this. Jimi had invited Eric Clapton personally. This wasn't a concert. This was a masterclass. The Royal Albert Hall's red velvet seats glowed under amber house lights. 5,272 people filled every row, every balcony tier, every standing space near the stage. The air smelled like anticipation, cigarette smoke, and that electric hum that only happens when people know they're about to witness something rare. Front row center, a man in a black leather jacket sat perfectly still. His blonde hair caught the light. His hands rested on his knees. Eric Clapton, 23 years old, guitar god, living legend, and tonight, a man about to have his mind changed. October 15th, 1968. The experience had already burned through 12 cities across Europe. But London felt different. This was Royal Albert Hall, where the Beatles had played, where classical masters had graced the stage, where guitar history had been written in wooden wire. Jimi had requested this venue personally, not the Marquee Club, not the Roundhouse. This room, intimate, acoustic-friendly, a room where every note mattered. Nobody knew yet that 3 weeks ago, Jimi had read an interview that made him sit in silence for 10 full minutes. September 22nd, 1968. Melody Maker magazine. The glossy pages sat on Jimi's coffee table in his Mayfair flat, tea stain on the corner. Chaz Chandler had circled the interview in red pen. Eric Clapton, legendary guitarist, talks about today's guitar scene. Interviewer: who represents real guitar mastery today? Eric Clapton: well, there's still proper blues. B.B. King, obviously. Albert King. In Britain, I try to keep that tradition alive. Interviewer: what about the newer players? Hendrix? Eric Clapton: Hendrix is talented, no question, but he uses effects as a crutch. All those fuzz boxes, Marshall stacks turned up to 11. Feedback, distortion. Real guitar doesn't need gimmicks. Strip away the electronics and what's left? Can the man actually play? Jimi read the next paragraph 3 times. Traditional blues is about purity. Guitar, amplifier, nothing between you and the sound except your fingers and your heart. Hendrix fills every space with noise. That's not mastery, that's avoidance. The flat was quiet except for London traffic below. Jimi set down the magazine, walked to his guitar case, pulled out his Stratocaster. He played 15 minutes of clean blues, each note precise. When he finished, the silence felt different. That's when Chaz Chandler knocked. The flat was quiet except for the hum of London traffic below. Jimi set down the magazine. Chaz Chandler, standing in the doorway, waited. When's Clapton playing next? Jimi asked. Why? Jimi stood up, walked to the window. London spread out below, gray and eternal. Invite him to the Royal Albert Hall show. Front row, VIP. You're inviting the man who just dismissed you? I'm inviting a master who forgot something important. Jimi's voice was calm. You can't teach someone who thinks they know everything, but you can remind them why they fell in love with 6 strings in the first place. The invitation went out September 25th. Clapton's manager called back the same day. Eric accepts. He's curious. Jimi smiled. Good. Curiosity is where learning begins. October 15th, 1968, 7:45 p.m. Backstage at Royal Albert Hall. Jimi stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his purple velvet jacket. The Stratocaster, white with maple neck, leaned against the wall. No pedals beside it. Not tonight. Just a guitar cable and a single amplifier. Fender twin reverb. Clean as Sunday morning. His band gathered in the hallway. Mitch Mitchell behind the drums. Noel Redding on bass. They'd been with him since the beginning. Knew his signals. Could follow him anywhere musically. But tonight's set list had a surprise they hadn't rehearsed. After Purple Haze, Jimi said, not looking away from the mirror, we're going clean. Mitch looked up. Clean? No effects, no distortion, just guitar and amplifier. Noel blinked. For how long? 8 minutes. E minor. Free form. The silence stretched for 3 seconds. Eric Clapton is in the front row. Jimmy turned around. He thinks I use effects as a crutch. Tonight I'm taking away the crutch. Mitch grinned slowly. And we're going to walk just fine. We're going to dance. 8 p.m. The lights dimmed. The crowd roared. Jimmy walked on stage and 5,272 people erupted, but his eyes went straight to the front row. Eric Clapton sat there, arms crossed, face neutral. Professional curiosity, maybe a hint of skepticism. Let's see what you've got without the toys. Jimmy smiled. Not the showman's smile, the chess player's smile. Purple haze opened the show. Full effects, full power. The Marshall stack screamed, the fuzz box growled, and for 4 minutes the stage was a sonic storm. When the final chord rang out, the crowd was breathless. Then the wind cries merry, gentle and sweet. Then Hey Joe, raw and bleeding. 45 minutes of hits. The audience sang every word. Eric Clapton nodded along, respectful but unmoved. Good showmanship. Effects are doing the heavy lifting. Then something changed. Jimmy stepped back from his pedal board, unplugged every cable except the one running directly from guitar to amplifier. The crowd noticed. Confusion rippled through the hall. Why is he disconnecting everything? Jimmy walked to the microphone, Stratocaster hanging silent from his shoulder. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice cut through the noise, we have a legend in the house tonight. The crowd noise dropped. Confusion, excitement. Eric Clapton, Jimmy pointed, one of the greatest blues guitarists who ever lived. 5,272 people turned as one. Spotted Clapton exploded in applause. Clapton stood up, surprised, smiling, waving. This was gracious, professional, classy. But Jimmy wasn't done. Eric, Jimmy said, and his voice carried new weight now. A few weeks ago, you said something in an interview. The applause died. Clapton's smile froze. You said I use effects as a crutch. That real guitar doesn't need gimmicks. 5,272 people went dead silent. The tension was a living thing now, coiled in the air between stage and front row. Jimmy nodded slowly. You know what, Eric? A pause. 3 seconds that felt like 30. You're right. Clapton looked confused. The crowd looked confused. Wait, is Jimmy agreeing? But Jimmy wasn't finished. I do use effects a lot, because I choose to. He plugged the guitar cable into the clean amplifier. But tonight, Eric, for you, I'm going to play 8 minutes of pure guitar. No effects, no distortion, no gimmicks. He adjusted the amp settings. Clean, bright, naked. I'm going to play your style, traditional blues. Then I'll add mine. Jimmy looked straight at Clapton. And we'll see if it's really about the effects. The Royal Albert Hall had never been this quiet. 5,272 people holding their breath as one. In the front row, Clapton's girlfriend reached for his hand, but he pulled away, leaning forward. His entire career, his identity as God, everything he'd built was about to be tested by proxy. In the balcony, a music journalist stopped writing mid-sentence. This wasn't just a concert anymore. This was a trial by fire, broadcast to every guitarist in London who would hear about it by morning. Clapton leaned forward. His girlfriend sitting next to him whispered something. Clapton shook his head. No, he wanted to see this, needed to see this. The doubt that had been growing in his mind since reading his own words in print demanded resolution. Jimmy turned to his band. No effects. Follow my lead. Key of E minor. Free form. Mitch and Noel locked eyes. They'd never rehearsed this, but they trusted him. Jimmy closed his eyes, took a breath, and the first note, a slow, bent, bleeding blue note, filled the Royal Albert Hall like a confession. If you were in Eric Clapton's seat right now, your entire identity built on one belief, would you be ready to have that belief challenged? What does it feel like when someone you dismissed proves you wrong in front of 5,272 witnesses? Minutes 1 to 3. Traditional blues. Clapton's territory. The first note hung in the air like smoke. E minor, bent a half step, released slow. Jimmy's fingers found the strings without looking. Muscle memory, instinct, something deeper than technique. The Stratocaster sang in that language Eric Clapton had spent 5 years perfecting. Slow blues, B.B. King phrasing, Albert King bends, clean, pure, unadorned. But something was different. The phrasing had an accent Clapton didn't recognize. This was something new speaking an old language. In the third row, Pete Townshend leaned forward. Behind him, Jimmy Page sat perfectly still, studying every note. This wasn't wild experimentation. This was deep knowledge expressed through controlled technique. The notes came faster now, but not showy fast, story fast. Each phrase connected to the next, building a narrative that moved like spoken word. The clean amplifier revealed everything. Every choice was visible, audible, undeniable. There was nowhere to hide. Eric Clapton felt his chest tighten. This wasn't just blues playing. This was blues understanding. The kind that took years to develop, the kind that couldn't be faked. The clean tone cut through the Royal Albert Hall's acoustics like truth through pretense. Every note mattered because every note was naked, exposed, honest. Clapton pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket, started writing. His girlfriend leaned over. "Are you taking notes?" "Those bends," Clapton whispered, pen moving. "That vibrato. That's not standard technique." The woman sitting behind Clapton whispered to her husband, "I didn't know anyone could make a clean guitar sound like that." Her husband shook his head, speechless. Neither did Eric. Minutes 3 to 5, soul and R and B. Jimmy's foundation. Without warning, the blues melted into something different. Stax record soul, Curtis Mayfield chord progressions, Steve Cropper rhythm guitar, but filtered through something entirely new. Jimmy's right hand became percussive, chopping at the strings, creating rhythm and melody simultaneously. The clean tone revealed the complexity of what he was doing. This wasn't just lead guitar. This was arrangement. Rhythm, melody, and harmony happening at once. His left hand found chord shapes that shouldn't have worked in this key, but did. Jazz voicings borrowed from Wes Montgomery, blues bends learned from B.B. King, all filtered through his own musical DNA. Each technique emerged naturally, organically, like he was translating between musical languages in real time. The crowd started moving differently, unsure whether to nod on the downbeat or the offbeat. So they did both, bodies swaying to rhythms they'd never heard before, but somehow understood instinctively. Clapton closed his notebook and just watched. This isn't showing off. This is showing up. This is someone speaking their native language fluently, confidently, without apology. Minutes 5 to 8. Integration. All styles fused. Jimmy brought everything together. Blues bends flowed into soul rhythms, flowed into jazz chords that shouldn't have worked but did. The clean tone made every choice transparent, every technique visible. He played chords and melody lines simultaneously, left hand forming traditional blues shapes on the lower strings, right hand pulling single note lines on the higher strings, two guitar parts from one guitar, one person. The bass and drums locked in, providing foundation for Jimmy to fly above. But he wasn't flying to show off. He was flying to communicate. The solo built not through volume or distortion, but through intensity of feeling. Each phrase answered the one before. Each section developed the theme. This was composition happening in real time. Clapton's mouth was open. He'd been watching Jimmy's hands trying to understand the technique, but the technique was in service of something larger. This was music that happened to be played on guitar, not guitar playing that happened to be music. The climax approached. Jimmy leaned into it, not rushing, not forcing, letting it arrive naturally. The way truth arrives. Inevitable, undeniable. The final 30 seconds, pure emotion. No effects, no gimmicks. Just a man with 6 strings expressing something that couldn't be said any other way. The notes came faster than thought, but every note mattered. Every note said, "This is who I am. This is what I hear. This is my voice." The last note, sustained, clean, perfect. Jimmy held it 15 seconds. Let it ring through the Royal Albert Hall. Let it fill every corner, every balcony, every heart. Then silence. 5 seconds of absolute quiet. Then 5,272 people exploded. The standing ovation lasted 12 minutes. People were crying. Eric Clapton was standing, applauding with his hands above his head, shaking his head in disbelief. Jimmy stood center stage, breathing hard, sweat on his forehead, Stratocaster hanging from his shoulder. He wasn't smiling the showman's smile anymore. This was different. This was the smile of someone who just said everything they needed to say. He walked to the microphone, waited for the noise to settle. "That was 8 minutes," he said, voice rough from exertion. "No effects. Traditional blues, soul, whatever you want to call it, all clean." He looked at Eric Clapton, locked eyes with him. "Eric, you said effects are a crutch. I just proved it they're not." His voice softened. "I don't need effects. I choose them. Not to hide behind, but to expand with." The crowd roared again, but Jimmy held up a hand. "Eric Clapton," he said, "come up here." The Royal Albert Hall went silent again, all eyes on the front row. Eric hesitated, looked at his girlfriend, looked at the stage, then stood up and walked toward the stairs. When he reached the stage, Jimmy extended his hand. Eric took it. Firm grip, eye contact, respect flowing both ways now. Jimmy handed Eric the microphone. Eric stood there for a moment, collecting himself. Then he spoke. "Jimmy," his voice cracked slightly, "I need to apologize." "No need," Jimmy said quietly, off mic. "No, I do." Eric turned to the audience. "I dismissed this man. I said he uses effects as a crutch. I was wrong." He looked at Jimmy. "You just played 8 minutes that rewrote what I thought I knew about guitar. That wasn't just technique. That was composition. You didn't just play clean guitar. You made clean guitar sound like an entire orchestra." Jimmy nodded. "That's what guitar is, Eric. It's a voice. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it screams. Both are valid." Eric's eyes were wet. Can we play together? Right now?" The crowd erupted. Jimmy smiled. Pure joy this time. "What key?" "Your choice. You lead, I'll follow." What happened next would be talked about for decades. Jimmy started with a simple phrase. Clean tone, conversational, a question posed in notes. Eric answered with traditional blues, slower, more emotional. A different answer to the same question, back and forth. Call and response. Neither trying to outdo the other, both trying to understand what the other was saying. 10 minutes of guitar dialogue that moved through every emotion. Joy, sadness, anger, peace. Pure musical communication between two masters who learned they were playing the same instrument for the same reasons. Backstage, 11:30 p.m. The dressing room was quiet now. The crowd had gone home, but their energy lingered in the air like incense. The band had packed up, roadies had loaded equipment. Only Jimmy and Eric remained, sitting on opposite couches, guitars still in hand. The silence stretched for minutes. Both men processing what had just happened on stage. The challenge, the response, the collaboration. The moment when competition had transformed into conversation. Eric stared at his hands, guitarist hands marked by years of steel strings and countless hours of practice. But tonight, those hands felt different. Tonight they felt limited. "How long have you been playing?" Eric asked finally. "Since I was 12. Self-taught mostly." Jimmy's voice was soft, tired from the performance, but somehow energized by it too. Eric's head snapped up. "Self-taught? That technique tonight? Those voicings, that phrasing?" Jimmy smiled, but it wasn't smug. It was generous. "Formal training gives you vocabulary. Self-teaching gives you accent. I learned by listening to you, to BB, to Muddy Waters, to everyone. Then I found my own way of saying the same things. But where did you learn to integrate styles like that? That wasn't just blues tonight. That was blues and soul and jazz and something I don't have a name for." Jimmy set down his guitar, leaned forward. "You want to know the truth? I learned it from growing up different. Black kid in Seattle, trying to fit in everywhere and nowhere at once. White rock clubs, black soul venues, jazz sessions, where they'd let me sit in. I had to learn every language just to survive. Made me realize they're all the same language underneath." Eric was quiet for a long moment. "The 8 minutes, he said slowly. "You played my style cleaner than I've played it lately. But it wasn't my style. It was yours speaking through mine." "No," Jimmy shook his head. I played your style through my experience. That's not better or worse. It's just different. Like you'd play my style through your experience, and it would sound different again. The room felt smaller now, intimate in a way that only comes after shared truth. Can I ask you something? Eric said. Sure. Why did you really invite me tonight? This wasn't about proving you could play clean guitar. You knew you could do that already. Jimmy walked to the window, looked out at London's late-night glow. When he spoke, his voice carried something Eric hadn't heard before. Vulnerability. Because I needed to hear someone say it, that I was hiding behind the effects. I've been thinking the same thing myself for months. What if they're right? What if all the feedback and distortion and volume is just noise? What if I am avoiding something? He turned around, and for the first time tonight, Eric saw something vulnerable in Jimmy's eyes. The confident performer was gone. This was just a musician, like him, wrestling with doubt. Your words gave me permission to find out, to test myself against the standard you represented. And you know what I discovered? That the question was wrong. It's not whether I can play without effects. It's why I choose to play with them. They're not a crutch. They're not avoidance. They're expansion. They let me say things I can't say any other way. The room felt charged with honesty. Two masters, stripped of pretense, talking about the thing that drove them both. The need to communicate through six strings. Eric stood up, extended his hand. Let's record together. Properly? No audience, just us. I want to learn from you. And I want to learn from you. Jimmy shook his hand. Different teachers, same school. They did record together. November 1968, Olympic Studios in London. A private session that lasted 6 hours. Eric brought his Gibson Les Paul. Jimmy brought his Stratocaster. They played everything. Traditional blues, experimental compositions, soul ballads, rock anthems. The session engineer later called it the most intense musical conversation he'd ever witnessed. Eric called it the most important lesson of his life. October 16, 1968. The Guardian ran a front-page interview with Eric Clapton. Last night, Jimi Hendrix taught me something fundamental, Clapton was quoted as saying. I thought guitar mastery was about purity, one approach perfected. But Jimmy showed me mastery is about integration. I was limiting myself by limiting him. 7 years after that night, Rolling Stone magazine ran a retrospective feature. Eric was the main interview subject. I spent years believing that effects were cheating, he told the magazine. Then Jimmy played 8 minutes without a single effect and showed me I'd been thinking about it backwards. Effects aren't a crutch. They're a paintbrush. Jimmy wasn't hiding behind them. He was painting with them. The interviewer asked, "Do you still think about that night?" Eric nodded. Every time I use an effect, I remember that it's a choice, not a necessity. Jimmy proved that the whole argument was pointless. Guitar is guitar. Clean, dirty, loud, quiet. What matters is what you say with it. Eric Clapton's final extended interview about Jimmy for a BBC documentary. People ask me about guitar gods, about who was the greatest, Eric said at 71 years old. I tell them about October 15, 1968, the night Jimi Hendrix took away every excuse I had for my limitations. He didn't beat me that night. He freed me. He showed me that guitar mastery isn't about following rules. It's about knowing the rules so well you can break them beautifully. The Royal Albert Hall performance became legend. Bootleg recordings circulated for decades, sought after not for sound quality, but for what they represented. The night two masters stopped competing and started collaborating. The night ego gave way to curiosity. The night a challenge became a conversation. Real mastery isn't about proving you're the best. It's about proving there's always more to learn, even from the people you thought you had figured out, especially from them.